Hello, welcome to another Looney Tunes review video. If you are new to the channel, make sure you subscribe to follow my journey to review all 1000 classic Looney Tunes shorts and give this video a like as well. So this is a review for My Green Fedora, released in 1935. It's the 103rd in the series, and it's directed by Friz Freleng. There is a restoration out there, though it's not currently on disc as far as I'm aware. Hopefully it'll make its way on a collector's choice set. And it's under copyright, can't show you the full thing here on YouTube, otherwise the video will just get blocked. But in case you haven't seen it, we see a rabbit, I think it's Peter from the previous short, and he's tasked to look after his little brother. He's not happy about it, so he tries to entertain his brother. But later on, we see a weasel kidnap the little brother, and Peter now needs to go rescue his brother. So not really much to it. So first up, we're going to go through the short and discuss the relevant bits of it, but it is a merry melodies, so my good friend Manny Cruz, the thetooneytenor, will be discussing the music portion of it later on. But let's take a look at this short. So firstly, this one has a little bit of an interesting history because it's directed by Friz Freleng, but you have Chuck Jones and you have Bob Clampett as animators, and Bob Clampett has actually spoken about this short via an interview with Michael Barrier. And Clampett was known for his razor-sharp memory, and that sort of thing has helped people like, say, Keith Scott with his Cartoon Voices book, because there was no record of voice actors a lot of the time, so Clampett would be like, oh yeah, it's such and such actor who did this minor role or whatever. So thanks to Clampett, we know a lot of things that otherwise would have been lost. But what he said about this short is that he claims that the story of this cartoon was submitted during a contest held by the studio, and Clampett's story idea won, and it was made as a short. He confirms that he actually animated the dance that Peter does to My Green Fedora, and that dance would end up being used by Friz Freleng in quite a few other shorts, so it's a good piece of animation considering the time period. The actual quote from the Michael Barrier interview goes, and I quote, "About the same time as the first Porky story, Leon announced a studio-wide contest with a money prize to whichever member of the staff turned in the best original story. So many of us entered the contest that the animation footage went down. My story, which was about a rabbit family, won first prize and was made as My Green Fedora. This gave me a big boost since I had just originated a couple of characters, Porky and Beans, and now I'd won the story contest. So from here on out, I kept flooding Leon's desk with story ideas, which I submitted in sketch form. These early story contributions of mine were filmed under Friz's direction." So for the moment, Clampett would be in Friz Freleng's unit, and then once Tex Avery arrives at the studio, he would then animate for him over at Termite Terrace, which did the black and white shorts. But let's take a look at this short from start to finish, and yeah, as mentioned, the title screen shows that we have Chuck Jones and Bob Clampett, and it's just amazing how in a few short years, Chuck Jones and Bob Clampett would be directors themselves. So as the short opens, we see the mother call out to Peter. So this is kind of like a sequel to Country Boy. So I don't know if this rabbit idea was something else, and because they made Country Boy, Friz maybe changed it so they used Peter Rabbit, since they already had the character designs anyway, so they didn't have to redesign anything. That information's perhaps lost to time, or maybe Clampett came up with Country Boy and he forgot about it. I don't know, but this comes across as a bit of a sequel anyway. Not that you need to see Country Boy before this one or anything. And Country Boy, in case you haven't seen the review, I've already got that on the channel. It's basically a very loose adaptation of the Peter Rabbit story where he goes to a garden and tries to steal vegetables and the gardener chases after him, so not really much to it. So within the first minute, we actually get everything set up, which is pretty good, because a lot of these Friz shorts around this time, sometimes the pacing can be a little bit off, but in this one, he's done pretty well. So within the first minute, the mother is tasking Peter to look after his brother, whose name is Elmer. And funnily enough, because his name is Elmer, at one point on a streaming service, they actually had this short grouped with other Elmer Fudd shorts. Just because his name is Elmer, yeah, kind of weird, but anyway, whatever. And I gotta say, that scream that the baby does, yeah, it's pretty annoying. And this short, it's okay, but there are some bits of it which are really annoying, and in the case in point, the baby's cry. I get that's the point, but sometimes they're too annoying, if you get my meaning. Well, at least Peter's trying to calm him down. I mean, he's not happy doing what he needs to do, but at least he's trying. And yeah, Elmer knows what he's doing, so he's basically just crying, looking on. He's like, yeah, I want attention. a lot of toddlers do that. They know that, okay, I can get what I want, so I'm going to cry, and you can sort of see in their face that they're just playing the whole thing up. Now you just hope that the parents would actually not fall for it, and I think too many parents do, unfortunately. So Peter now has to think, oh yeah, how am I going to keep my brother calm? What do I need to do? So Peter goes into the closet, and he ends up trying to figure out what he needs to do, and he sees this jacket, but it ends up all being moths anyway. It's not a ha-ha joke, but it's okay. It's fine for what it is, I suppose. So he has the idea to put on a green fedora, because again, Melodies need to promote a song, which in this case is My Green Fedora, and my good friend Manny Cruz will go through all that later on. He starts dancing to the song, and my opinion of the song, it's nice. It's quite catchy. I guess it's not the wildest or best song that they've actually done, but yeah, it's fine for what it is, and I like the animation to it too. It's not quite the Clampett we all know and love later on, but for what it is, it's pretty good. And I can see why they reused it too. Now, if the voice of Peter and Elmer sound familiar, that's because if you've watched the short Page Miss Glory, which quite frankly is a better short than this, but that's okay. Not all of the shorts can be winners or anything. But the voice of the bellboy in Page Miss Glory, it's the same actor. And his name is Jackie Morrow. And he was a child actor at the time, and it was pretty popular too. So he did the voices of Peter and Elmer. And later on, he was used again by Tex Avery to make Page Miss Glory. So, yeah, in case you're wondering. And in case you were wondering what that laugh is that the baby does, which sounds incredibly weird. In fact, Clampett even touched upon it in another interview where Freleng just wanted to add this in for some reason. But it's a take on the comedian Joe Penner. So he does that yuck, yuck, yuck laugh. Later on, that would be the same inspiration that Tex Avery would use for Egghead later on. So if you hear what Egghead sounds like, yeah, that's a take on the comedian Joe Penner. So we see that Elmer's not really impressed with Peter. I mean, quite frankly, I think Peter did a pretty decent job, all things considering. But anyway, he's not impressed. We now see the villain of the piece, which is just your generic weasel, complete with overalls, I guess. But anyway, according to Keith Scott, he just does some snarls in here, and those snarls were done by Ted Pierce. Ted Pierce had actually arrived at the studio not too long before this short was made, so this would have been a very early thing for him to do. Yeah, and I actually like the animation of Peter not being happy that Elmer doesn't like his performance. In fact, this short, while not perhaps great, it's full of little moments where you can see that they're at least putting some effort in, they're trying to show emotion. And again, a lot of the time, Freleng, Jones, Clampett, Disney were king at the time, so they would have been inspired to do what Disney were doing. So, all things considered, I think they do pretty good in some parts. Now, the weirdest thing about this short is, why on earth is there a hole in this particular house? Did this weasel steal some rabbits in the past at some point? It's kind of weird, isn't it? And wouldn't anyone have fallen through that hole at some point? It's just a rug covering it. But anyway, clearly I'm overthinking it, but it just comes across as pretty weird. But anyway. And I also like the fact they're trying to be cinematic here. So we got some nice direction by Freleng. The animation looks like it may even be a Chuck Jones scene, as it's sort of in his wheelhouse, and we see some nice little shadows. It's, again, a really nice touch. I think they do a pretty good job. Now we see this close-up of the weasel, and my goodness, that looks really amazing, especially in this restoration, which again, I hope comes out on disc at some point. I mean, despite crying, Elmer also seems to be holding out on his own against this weasel, so again, it's a whole toddler thing, I'm just going to cry anyway. So we see that Peter walked really far away. He really didn't want to actually look after his brother, did he? I can't really blame him, it's kind of annoying, but still, you'd think he would have a change of heart and go, yeah, I got to look after my little brother. No, his motivation for going back is, I'm going to be told off by mums. His motivation, kind of a selfish one, but anyway, whatever. He walks into the room, realizes Elmer's missing, and then he sees the hole. I mean, how long has that hole been there for? It's so bizarre, but anyway. Now, I love how underground, I love the use of shadows in this one. And this may be too stripped Technicolor, but at least Freleng does things pretty well here. I love the look of it, and this restoration really shows off the shadows, the lights, and the limited color scale. When we see Elmer is about to be cooked, But you can see that there are some exposure issues here and there on certain frames, so it looks like they were trying to do something here to make it all more moody, but for whatever reason, some of the frames are a little bit off. But still, looks pretty good, all things considered. And that scene, though, is kinda creepy, though, because it's like he wants to cook Elmer alive. Why didn't he just kill him first? I don't know, whatever. So Peter shows up, and the weasel Elmer has, of course, left, and he does that weird bit thing, and I'm trying to figure out what the origin is of that. So he does that to work out which way he's going to go. If anyone knows the origins of that, definitely let me know in the comments below. So we get a little scene where you got 3 holes that Peter pops out of, and given all the hits that this weasel have done on Peter, you'd think he'd have a concussion by now. Anyway, sure. So we get all these scenes involving all these tunnels, which, again, how all these tunnels are completely under the house there. How long has this weasel been around, and how did he make all these tunnels anyway? Yes, I know, I'm overthinking it, of course. Now, I love that laugh that the weasel does in this particular bit here. It's really good. And again, Ted Pierce would have done that, and we know that Ted Pierce is going to have a rather bright future, so he'll be at Warner Brothers for a few years. He'll go to Miami for a bit, but then he comes back at Warner Brothers, where he effectively stays up until the 50s. And as we finish up the short in the last minute or so, it becomes a little bit more dramatic. So Peter's now chasing to rescue his brother, and I'm wondering if his motivation is still because he doesn't want to get scolded by his mother, but anyway, at least we can get some drama here. So we see that there was another hole in the backyard, and again, didn't anyone notice that there was a hole, or maybe a kid could have fallen through at some point? No, whatever. Whatever.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
So Peter has the idea to flood the tunnels with some water. I mean, if it was just a weasel in there, it'd be a good idea, but couldn't he potentially drown his brother? Anyway, sure, whatever.
Boy, I really hope somebody got fired for that blunder.
And we get the whole scene involving the water and Peter rescuing Elmer. The water pressure is then turned up, and they decide to water torture this weasel, because why not? And the weasel falls on some cactus that's perfectly placed, and we defeat this weasel. We end up with Peter now regretting rescuing his brother, because he now does that Joe Penna laugh, and, well, he decides to squirt water under his bottom. The end. So, I've been prattling on long enough, so my good friend Manny Cruz, the thetooneytenor, is now going to discuss the origins of the music for this short. So, take it away, Manny.
Hi, everyone. This is Manny Cruz, the tooneytenor, coming at you with the latest edition of It's Time for Manny's Music Time, with music trivia for you today. Bum! For the 1935 merry melody, My Green Fedora, directed by Friz Freleng, and with musical direction by Bernard Brown. So let's jump right into this one, because there aren't a lot of cues, but there is a decent amount of information I want to cover in regard to the songwriters, because there are 4 songwriters that I want to touch upon. So to start off, obviously the cartoon begins with the song. Either it's called I'm Wearing My Green Fedora or just My Green Fedora. And the song was written by Al Lewis, Joseph Meyer, and Al Sherman. So 3 songwriters for this one. This is the only performance of the song, or the only recording that existed prior to the cartoon. Or pretty much, if you want to hear the song, watch this cartoon. Or if you want to watch 1937's The Woods Are Full of Cuckoo, which I recorded the Manny's Music Time for about a few weeks ago, back in July. I'm recording this in August of 2024. I recorded a few weeks ago. But in that cartoon, they reuse animation from this cartoon. In this one, Peter Rabbit is singing the title song, and he's trying to impress his little brother, Elmer. But in The Woods Are Full of Cuckoos, they traced over the animation with a penguin that was going for the whole Joe Penner vibe.
I'm wearing my green fedora. Fedora, not Alice, not Annie, not Daisy, but...
And in this cartoon, Elmer Rabbit, the younger one, he even laughs like Joe Penner at one point. So if you want to hear that song, you have to watch these 2 cartoons, and that's pretty much it. And obviously you hear the title track throughout the cartoon, scored various ways by Bernard Brown.
Now I usually come to town, need a battered old Hannah Brown. But I gotta wear green when me and my queen go stepping around. She's fussy about
So yeah, no recording to refer to, which is a bit of a drag because I enjoy when I do Manny's Music Times and there's a song that, was featured in a Warner's film or a short subject, and I get to hear the original performance of it, or either in the film or I hear it on a record, and it's always good to hear an interesting take. But for this one, sadly, that's not the case. Sorry. Now, I want to talk about the three songwriters of this particular title track. So, the information for them, I'm going to be getting them from Wikipedia, but whenever I read from Wikipedia, I always make sure it has decent sources and whatnot. I'm going to start off with Al Sherman. And here I go. I quote Abram Sherman. He was born September 7th, 1897, and he died September 16th, 1973. And by the way, like I said, I'm quoting this from Wikipedia. His pen name, or you could say his stage name, was Al Sherman, was a Russian-American songwriter and composer active during the Tin Pan Alley era in American music history. Some of his most recognizable songs include Now's the Time to Fall in Love and You Gotta Be a Football Hero, unquote. So for that song, that's the one that stood out for me. You Gotta Be a Football Hero because that's the name of a song that was featured in a 1935 Popeye cartoon from Warner Brothers' rival Fleischer Studios based out of New York City. But yeah, when I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, I like that cartoon, Popeye playing football against Bluto and all that other jazz. But I didn't know that this is the guy who wrote that song.
Anything in town, you gotta be a football hero to get along with the beautiful girls. Oh.
So anyway, back into the Wikipedia article, and I quote, Sherman is one link in a long chain of family members who were musical. Most notably, his sons Robert and Richard, referred to popularly as the Sherman Brothers, were to join the ranks of America's most highly regarded songwriters. Pairing up and mentoring the Sherman Brothers team has often been referred to as Al Sherman's greatest songwriting achievement, unquote. So the Sherman Brothers, I had no idea that, this guy was their dad. And I know a little bit about the Sherman Brothers. I do know that one of the brothers passed away, Richard. I saw the news that he passed away back in May of this year, 2024. So I'm going to quote from the Wikipedia article, and I quote, The Sherman Brothers were an American songwriting duo that specialized in musical films made of brothers Robert B. Sherman, December 19th, 1925 to March 6, 2012, and Richard M. Sherman, June 12th, 1928, and he passed away May 25th, 2024. Together, they received various accolades, including Academy Awards and Grammy Awards. They're in the Hollywood Walk of Fame, so on and so forth, Golden Globes. I'm just skipping ahead the article. And here's the big stuff, and I quote, The Sherman Brothers wrote more motion picture musical song scores than any other songwriting team in film history. Their works include the live-action films The Parent Trap, Mary Poppins, Chitty Chitty Bang Bang, Ed Knob and Broomsticks, Sword and the Stone, The Jungle Book, which they did not write, The Bare Necessities, Charlotte's Web, The Aristocats, The Many Adventures of Winnie the Pooh. So, unquote. So if you're a Disney buff, you know who these guys are. I was somewhat familiar with them, and some of these films I've seen and some of them I have not. There's a lot of films I've never seen. But I could think of a good friend of mine. If you're listening to this, hi, Christine Cummings, opera singer, soprano, and a friend of mine from graduate school. She's a huge Disney buff, so I know that all these films that I'm mentioning, she was like, oh my God, I love that song. I love that song. So hi there, Christine. And they also wrote the song It's a Small World After All. So probably one of the most performed songs ever in history. So look at that. Very famous team of songwriters, and I'm going to be talking about their old man today. So let's get back to Al, or Albert, or Avram, which was his real name. And I'm back to the article, and I quote, Al Sherman was born to a musical Jewish family in Kiev, Russian Empire, which is now Ukraine. So his father, violinist Samuel Sherman, fled a Cossack pogrom in 1903. And I looked up, a pogrom means a riot. So a lot of instability going on in the region at the time. Back to the article, and I quote, Samuel settled in Prague, which was at the time part of the Austro-Hungarian Empire. He eventually found success working as a concertmaster, first violinist, and intermittent court composer in the royal court of Emperor Franz Joseph. Within a year or so of his arrival, Samuel's family came to live with him in Prague. And a concertmaster, so you have different sections of the string section. You have the first violin, second violins, so on until first trumpets, second trumpets. Usually the first play the melody, and then the second violin, second trumpets, they play the harmony. They help support first violins. Usually the cream of the crop are trusted in being the first, like first chair, if you ever did like high school band back in the day. But the principal first violinist is called the concertmaster. That's usually the person at the beginning of an orchestral concert. They tune the orchestra. The oboe plays the first note, and then the concertmaster does that. And usually at the end of a performance or before, the concertmaster shakes the conductor's hand. So, yeah, it was a big deal. Going back to the article, and I quote, "As a young boy, Al attended concerts in the royal court. Conspicuously, he hid in the gallery wings while his father performed for the emperor. Sherman would later remark that it was these moments which originally enticed his interest in music. In 1909, the Shermans relocated to New York City. In 1911, frustrated by the lack of available work, Samuel, Al's dad and Richard and Robert's grandfather, left his wife Lena and their 5 young children, Olga, Al, Edith, Regina, and newborn Harold. At age 13, Sherman quit school to become the family's primary breadwinner. At 16, he taught himself how to play the piano and found work in bands. So, skipping ahead a little bit in the article, and I quote, "Despite youth and scant knowledge of English, his natural talent for piano improvisation soon earned him a reputation as a top mood music pianist, mood music's in quotations. His services to improvise inspirational music were sought by many silent film stars, and actually in 1916, Universal Pictures signed Al to do bit parts in silent films as well, and he later appeared in motion pictures with actors like Mary Pickford and William Powell. Al's composing career began in 1918 when he became a staff pianist for the Remix Music Company. There he worked alongside George Gershwin, and he also joined ASCAP, the American Society of Composers, Authors, and Publishers, in 1919. He got married in 1923 to a silent film actress, Rosa Danis, Dancis. In the 20s, 30s, and 40s, Al collaborated with a ton of different songwriters, including Al Lewis, who I'm going to talk about in a bit, Joseph Meyer, as well as others. Sherman quickly rose to become one of Tin Pan Alley's most sought-after songwriters between 1930 and 1934 during the last days of vaudeville. He and several of his fellow hitmakers formed a sensational revue, performing all over the eastern seaboard. And some of his most famous songs include Lindbergh, the Eagle of the USA, talking about Charles Lindbergh. For sentimental reasons, I only really know that song because they made a pun for scent, like smell, sentimental reasons, in a Pepe Le Pew cartoon from the 40s that won the Academy Award. And along with Al Lewis, who again I'm going to talk about in a bit, they wrote Living in the Sunlight, Loving in the Moonlight. Al Sherman wrote the music and Al Lewis wrote the lyrics. I always think of the performance from Tiny Tim from the 60s. Living in the sunlight, loving in the moonlight, having a wonderful time. Which, as you know, was featured in the first episode of SpongeBob SquarePants, Help Wanted. So that's how I learned about that song from SpongeBob. See, the world of being music and geeky, just it all ties up in one neat little package. Just to wrap this up about Al Sherman, he passed away in Los Angeles, California, September 16th, 1973, at the age of 76. So let's jump into Al Lewis. Real name was Alvin Lewis. Alvin! Couldn't help it. He was born April 18th, 1901 in New York City, and he died April 4th, 1967, once again in New York City. So, a little bit about him. This is actually pretty short. He was a lyricist, songwriter, and publisher, and I quote, "He is thought of mostly as a Tin Pan Alley era lyricist. However, he did write music on occasion as well. Professionally, he was most active during the 20s into the 50s. During this time, he often collaborated with popular songwriters Al Sherman and Abner Silver. Among his most famous songs are You Gotta Be a Football Hero, as I mentioned before, and Blueberry Hill, unquote." And thinking of Blueberry Hill, probably the most famous version that was recorded in 1956 by the early rock and roll musician and piano player Fats Domino. On Blueberry Hill. Da, 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 da. It's been a while since I've heard it, but it's a good early rock and roll track. Let's talk about the last songwriter of My Green Fedora, Joseph Meyer, or Meyer. Meyer. I'm going to say Meyer, okay? Like the mayor of a city. This once again is from Wikipedia, and I quote, Joseph Meyer, born March 12th, 1894 in Modesto, California. And he died June 22nd, 1987, at the age of 93. Wow, he had a long run in New York City. He died a year before I was born, so I just missed out on, well, I never met him, but you get the point. So Joseph Meyer, quoting once again, was an American songwriter who wrote some of the most notable songs of the first half of the 20th century. Many of his songs were originally written for musicals. A little bit about his early life. Joseph Meyer was born in Modesto, California. He studied violin in Paris for a year in 1907, 1908. He graduated from Lowell High School in San Francisco, where he played in a cafe. He served in World War I and discharged. He worked at a mercantile business in the United States. He began songwriting in 1921, and when he stopped working in the mercantile business, he moved to New York City. A little bit more, jumping ahead later life, Joseph collaborated with many famous songwriters, including Al Lewis, Al Sherman, and Buddy DeSilva. 3 of his most famous songs were the 1922 hit, I've never heard this one before, California, Here I Come. So look at that, a huge connection to Warner Brothers cartoons. So California, Here I Come, a Carl Stalling favorite. And here's another big one that Carl Stalling used a lot that Joe M. wrote, a cup of coffee, a sandwich, and you. So he wrote the melody for it, and the lyrics were contributed by Billy Rose and another guy that I've never talked about before, Al Dubin. And it even says here, he wrote the melody for that song, often used in Warner Brothers cartoons during scenes of hunger, cooking, and eating. And yeah, that's about it for the 3 songwriters of the title track. Now, I wanted to jump a little bit more into a songwriter that you're going to hear a lot in Warner Brothers cartoons that Carl Stalling definitely, quote unquote, I don't want to say sampled because, sampling technology didn't exist back then, but he definitely borrowed heavily from this particular songwriter. And that songwriter is J.S. Zamecnik. I always thought his name was pronounced Zamecnik, Zamecnik, but it's Zamecnik. So now I actually know how to properly pronounce his name. Took me long enough. But yes, why am I talking about J.S. Zamecnik? Because a lot of cartoons do feature his music, and this particular cartoon features 2 of his cues. The first one is Stealthy Escape. That's the music that you hear when the Weasel, the villain of this cartoon, starts tunneling underground, and he goes inside the house and he abducts Elmer. And man, I gotta say, speaking of which, that close-up of the Weasel with the huge creepy eyes and the bloodshot eyes, if I was a kid, that definitely would have freaked me out because stuff like that just gave me the heebie-jeebies. And speaking of the 2 brothers real quick, Peter and Elmer. So Peter, he was in another cartoon that I talked about, Country Boy. And Elmer, the little baby rabbit. And I'm just thinking, I'm like, man, I'm a younger brother myself. And I'm like, was I that obnoxious when I was that young? I mean, the scene in particular that kills me when you could clearly tell that Elmer's just like, he's faking his crying. He takes a huge breath. He looks like a singer when he's doing it. He starts crying. And just, I love the animation. It's like he's going through the motions just to annoy his older brother. So to my 2 older brothers, I hope I wasn't that annoying when I was young. Hopefully I still am not as an adult, but we're all in our 30s, and well, 2 of us are in their 30s and my oldest brother's in his 40s. So hopefully I don't drive him crazy at this point. And the other J.S. Zamecnik cue that you hear is Traffic. Traffic is one that I've heard this one a gazillion times. It's actually, according to IMDb, which isn't always the most reliable source, this is the first time that particular cue was used in a Warner Brothers cartoon. That's the music that you hear during the chase when the Weasel tries to run away with Elmer and Peter's chasing after him. That cue automatically stood out to me because the 2 cartoons in particular I thought of. It's the music that you hear in 1938's Porky the Fireman by Frank Tashlin. I mean, Anthony will probably splice in a clip of that music, but I thought of Porky the Fireman, and then the later part of the song, ba 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 ba, or so on and so forth, makes me think of 1943's Falling Hair from Bob Clampett. And I used to see Porky the Fireman and Falling Hair a lot as a kid. So this melody was just burned into my brain the second I heard it. I was like, yep, I know exactly which one this is. So it's cool to hear a pretty recognizable song from my experiences. So let's talk a little bit about J.S. Zamecnik, not Zamecnik. Now I know how to properly pronounce his name. So here's a little information about John Steppen that I got. I'm going to read a little bit from Wikipedia. I'm going to read a little bit from ragpiano.com. And I quote, this is from Wikipedia. John Steppen Zamecnik, or J.S. Zamecnik, he was born May 14th, 1872 in Cleveland, Ohio, the home of the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, and SummerSlam, which was a few days ago. Look at me, I'm getting to wrestling talk. All right, back to the article. And he passed away June 13th, 1953, at the age of 81 in Los Angeles, California, was an American composer and conductor. He is best known for the photoplay music he composed for use during silent films by pianists, organists, and orchestras. Zamecnik used many pseudonyms, including Dorothy Lee, Lionel Baxter, R.L. or Robert Creighton, Arturo de Castro, nice Latino name thrown in there, Josh and Ted Hathaway, Catherine Hawthorne, Roberta Hudson, Ione Coelho, J. Edgar Lowell, not J. Edgar Hoover. You know, J. Edgar Hoover will appear and destroy us all. Ghostbusters reference. Jules Renard, Frederick Van Norman, Hal Vinton, and Grant Wellesley. Welllesley. Wow, words you're failing. Unquote. So a while back, I was doing the Manny's Music Time for, I think it was Mr. and Mrs. is the name, which there's an incorrect musical thing in there that I have to correct because someone emailed me, and he never replied back to my email. So, hey, if you're listening, can you please send back that email, my friend? Thank you, because I want to talk to you. But I was doing Mr. and Mrs. is the name, and I was looking at the cue sheet, and it said Jules Renard, and I'm like, who the heck is that? I'm just looking all over the internet, and then I eventually found that it was a pseudonym, that J.S. Zamecnik. I was like, dude, like, I know who that is. Why couldn't he just use his real name? But whatever. So, going back to J.S. Zamecnik. See, I think I'm starting to say the way I used to say it incorrectly. My bad. So, like I said, he was born in 1872 in Ohio, and his mom was Catherine Hrbecki, and his father was Joseph Zamecnik. His parents arrived in New York City. This is again from the Rag Piano article, and I quote, his parents arrived in New York City on May 26, 1870, with his older sisters Catherine and Anna. John was one of 3 children in the family that survived to adulthood. His father was an accomplished musician and saw this propensity in his son, so he made sure he was musically trained early on. In the 1880 census, the family was living in Cleveland, with Joseph working as a musician and a barrel cooper. Interestingly enough, they were living in a home on Croton Street, next door to a music teacher, Mr. A.J. Rock. Sounds like a wrestler name. Going back to the article, and I quote, at age 15, John took courses in harmony and theory. At age 18, he was sent to the Prague Conservatory of Music to study all facets of music. This included a composition class with the famed composer Antonin Dvorak. So, unquote. So, Dvorak is a huge composer in the late Romantic period. He wrote the New World Symphony amongst other pieces of music, and Zamecnik got to work with one of the masters of that time period. Back to the article, and I quote, after 4 years, John returned to the United States and is listed in the 1900 census, still in Cleveland as a musician, living in his parents' house. And like I said, his dad was also a musician, so on and so forth. Back in Cleveland, John married Mary Barbara Hodis in 1904, and they had 2 sons, Walter and Edwin. In 1908, he became the musical director for the new Cleveland Hippodrome. This gave him a chance to have some of his compositions for stage and orchestra perform, and once they started showing movies, he quickly adapted to this by writing appropriate music that could be interchanged between films with similar scenarios. This would soon become his primary genre and one that would influence cinema for quite some time. In 1908, Zamecnik's first published piece with Sam Fox, The College Yell March, began a long relationship with a Cleveland publisher that made him a force in the publishing industry in spite of his non-metropolitan area location in northern Ohio. Some of his early pieces included syncopated marches, waltzes, and good popular tunes, yet with something more. Fox saw in Zamecnik a musical source that was obviously well-versed in classical writing and performance, yet it did not put down popular styles, even embracing them to a degree. So I like that. It's like he clearly had training in classical music, but Zamecnik was not so hoity-toity that he looked down on jazz or rag or other styles of music that were popular at the time. I respect that. I mean, I know my experience as being a classical musician, and I was guilty of it too, that there are times that us with classical training, we're like, oh, how dare you? And over the years, I'm like, you know what, that mentality is kind of a drag. the majority of what I listen to is not even classical music. And I feel like that sense of guilt, like, oh no, I should be listening to Wagner and Tchaikovsky and Mozart all day. It's like, no, like, I enjoy that and I've sung that type of music before, but variety is the spice of life. Let's say it that way. Jumping back into the article, and I quote, the publisher, Sam Fox, also saw promise in the film score snippets John had written and soon started to publish them as well. It was a daunting task trying to retrofit not only music, but at times full scores for films from Cleveland, Ohio, when the music industry at the time was largely focused in New York City and Los Angeles. However, once Fox started releasing folios of Zamecnik's film cues in 1913 for distribution to and use of pianists and movie houses across the country, he established an important foothold in the industry that lasted throughout the 20s. Fox also published Zamecnik songs written for some stage musicals and other theatrical productions. Zamecnik also worked in arranging, and he wrote, like I said, a lot of popular songs and waltzes. And according to this article, 21 different pseudonyms that he wrote under. And it says he probably did that in a way to fatten up the portfolio of composers that the company had, the Sam Fox Company. He didn't want it to seem like, oh, it's only the same guy writing the same music. Jumping back to the article. Well, before I jump into that, I do want to say some of the research and some of the scores themselves of Zamecnik's music. I want to thank the Silent Film Sound and Music Archive, which sadly at the moment the website's not working for me. It was working a while back. But the Silent Film Sound and Music Archive is an archival website that was created by one of my professors in my graduate studies, Dr. Kendra Leonard. And I actually took her film music class in grad school. And I want to shout her out and thank you, Kendra, for your help and guidance, because she knew how much of a Looney Tune buff I am. And I was like, you know what? Let me explore more about talking about the music in these cartoons. And lo and behold, a few months later, that's when I started recording for Anthony. So I want to thank Kendra for the great work she does in preserving all different types of silent music and some of Zamecnik's music itself. And like I said, at the moment, the website's not working, but hopefully it'll be up soon again. I want to dig more into Zamecnik's cues. And I mean, I'm not a great piano player, but I want to get a gist of how to play it and so on and so forth. So going back to the article, some of those popular songs that Zamecnik wrote were orchestrated for use as movie cues, and he sometimes composed songs for specific films. After a while, he also composed works to be used with newsreels, which gave them a whole new dynamic under the right hands. Many pieces from the multiple Fox folios of Zamecnik's works in both piano and orchestral formats found their way into full scores for early sound films and used incessantly in sound cartoons as well, particularly by Carl Stalling for Warner Brothers. So yeah, they published his music. Sam Fox had books published for organists and pianists in different silent movie theaters, and it would say like, oh, this music is appropriate for a Western. This music is appropriate for a scene where people are falling in love. This music is appropriate for insert racial stereotype here. Like there are cues that were written for Chinese characters, Native American characters, so on and so forth. So I was listening to different cues before, and I could keep reading on and on, but I'm already looking, and I've already recorded far longer than I intended. Sorry, Anthony. But I do like at the end of the article. Oh, and how could I forget? I'll read these last two paragraphs because they're very important. And I quote, one of the best exposures to his work these days is in part a tribute from Carl Stalling, who used several Zamecnik cues, both credited and largely unknown, in many of the Looney Tunes and Merry Melodies cartoons of the late 1930s to the mid-1950s. Carl Stalling, who started with Disney in the 1920s, picked up the clear notion from Zamecnik that even in animation, the music should properly fit the scene, even if it was in the form of clever association by pun. But Zamecnik's influence was also felt in the great reach that Fox Music was able to maintain throughout the world from the unassuming yet important locale of Cleveland, Ohio. For a great example of Zamecnik's work, one only needs to turn to his score for the 1927 film Wings, which was recently reorchestrated and reunited with the film in 2011 through the valiant efforts of San Francisco pianist and sound film historian Frederick Hodges. Even before the often lauded score from King Kong from the hands of Max Steiner, it is clear that Zamecnik understood the relationship between the music and the screen action, giving an emotional thrust to the roadshow version of the film that would have been greatly diminished without the careful thought he put into it. So, unquote. So I like that house. So yeah, 1927 film Wings. I've never seen it, but I've heard it before that he wrote the score for it. And if I'm not mistaken, it is the inaugural winner of the Academy Award for Best Picture. So it was the first one. So kind of neat. I was trying to remember. I know this is important in film history. So yep, the first Best Picture winner. So on and so forth. And briefly wrapping up things about Zamecnik, I want to keep talking about him, but again, this is longer than I want it to be. Some of the cues that pop into my head that are featured in Warner Brothers cartoons, besides Traffic, which I said it was used in Porky the Fireman and Falling Hair, there's also cues like Fate. I always think of the transformation scene of Lawyer Goodwill from The Case of the Stuttering Pig. That's the music you hear when Lawyer Goodwill's mixing the chemicals and when he transforms into his monster form. That's Zamecnik. In the Stirrups, also known as Western scene, that's I think of Buckaroo Bugs. Actually, that was the first cartoon I ever recorded with Anthony several years ago. But I always think of that cartoon in particular for In the Stirrups, another Zamecnik piece. Mysterioso, I'm trying to remember what cartoon that was featured in, but I was listening to it. I was like, it sounds familiar. And the other one is Treacherous Knave. Bum ba dun da da. Bum ba dum ba da. Bum 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 bum. Think of The Blowout from 1936 from Tex Avery. That's the music that you hear throughout that particular cartoon. When you see the Mad Bomber, that's his theme song. So yeah, these are my thoughts and Manny's music time for My Green Fedora. I was like, wait, what was the name of this cartoon again? Because I'm talking about Zamecnik and all these songwriters. I was like, wait a minute, there was a cartoon here? So yeah, the traffic cue, by the way, lasts 2 minutes long near the end of the cartoon. It's like it takes up the majority of the ending and it goes into the final version of or reprise or reprise of My Green Fedora at the end of the cartoon when the villain is stopped. Hooray! So thanks for listening, folks. It's always a pleasure to chat some cartoons and music. You could follow me in social media at thetooneytenor, thetooneytenor, for more music, more geek stuff, and cute photos of my dog Nina. And she kind of reminds me of Elmer. She's cute, but she's a naughty little girl because Elmer is a naughty little boy. And it was kind of funny at the end. His brother gave him the comeuppance with the sprinkler system. So all that jazz. So thanks for listening, folks. Always a pleasure. Talk to you soon. And that's all, folks.
That's all, folks.
This one is a charming little short. It is what it is, and we have to look at this one in context of the time where Tex Avery hadn't arrived yet, but as Clampett mentioned how he has more involvement in it, you can see that some more wackiness is trying to come through. This is very tame compared to what will come later on, but at least it's somewhat of an improvement over some of the shorts that Friz Freleng did in 1934 in terms of the Merry Melodies series. Now, this one gets 6 out of 10. It's nice. It actually looks good. Some nice animation in here. It's not ha-ha funny, but it is what it is. It's not a bad short at all. So, that'll do it for this one. Thank you so much for watching, guys, and until next time, take care.
You.